She was left for dead beneath a desert sun. He had vanished from the world by choice. But fate doesn't knock, it crashes in like a storm. When a former billionaire turned recluse finds a dying woman buried in the sand, their worlds collide in a story of betrayal, redemption, and the kind of love that grows in silence and survives fire. The desert was merciless. Wind swept across cracked earth, kicking up ghostly whirlwinds as the late afternoon sun blazed down like a curse. Among the rattlesnakes and parched brush a figure lay still, half buried in sand, body limp, bound at the wrists and ankles with plastic ties. Ivy Laurent, 34 years old, once hailed as the youngest CFO in a billion-dollar corporation, had become unrecognizable. Her olive-toned skin was blistered from the sun, her once pristine blouse and skirt were torn and stained, her curly chestnut hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry as ash. She hadn't spoken in days, there was no one to speak to, only heat, only silence. The betrayal had been swift. One day she was in a boardroom analyzing forecasts. The next she was running for her life, hunted by the very people she once trusted. She'd thought escaping the city meant safety, but they'd followed her, and they'd left her here to die. Just as her heartbeat slowed to a whisper, a new sound rose over the wind. The rhythmic pounding of hooves. Ivy couldn't turn her head, but her eyes fluttered open just enough to see a dark silhouette approaching on horseback. The rider stopped several feet away and slowly dismounted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty tan duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. His boots crunched over the sand as he approached, and he crouched beside her without speaking. His fingers were rough but gentle as he checked her pulse. He didn't ask who she was, didn't flinch at the bruises. "I got you," he murmured, as if speaking to a wounded animal. With a swift motion he drew a hunting knife and cut through the ties. Then he lifted her effortlessly into his arms. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Ivy allowed herself to lose consciousness, not from despair, but from the fragile seed of hope that had just been planted. Ivy awoke with a gasp, lungs burning with dry air. But this air was cooler, cleaner, scented faintly with wood smoke and sage. She blinked against the dim light of an oil lantern and realized she was in a cabin. Wooden beams overhead, quilted blanket beneath her. Her wrists were wrapped, not tied. Her lips, though dry, were no longer bleeding. She wasn't dead. Across the room, the man who had rescued her sat in a chair by the window, polishing a rifle. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Outside she could hear the gentle sounds of horses. "You're lucky I ride that path," he said, not looking up. His voice was low, unhurried. Ivy tried to sit up but winced. "Who are you?" He glanced over his shoulder. His eyes were sharp, green as pine needles, rimmed with sunlines that hinted at a life lived outdoors. He had shoulder-length black hair and light brown skin that bore the tan of a lifetime under open skies. "Beck Wilder," he replied. "I've got a ranch 2 miles south. You were barely alive when I found you." Ivy stared at him. "Why did you help me?" He shrugged. "Because I could. You needed saving. End of story." But it wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. As he stood to bring her a glass of water, Ivy noticed something strange. His hands were rough like a rancher's, but there was something refined about the way he moved. Precise, practiced, controlled. He didn't talk much, but every word was deliberate, every glance calculated. There was a story under that hat, she thought, one that hadn't been told in a long, long time. Beck nursed Ivy back to health with the quiet efficiency of a man used to taking care of things alone. He kept her hydrated, fed her soup made from root vegetables and desert herbs, and changed her bandages without a word. And though he rarely pried, Ivy found herself speaking piece by piece of the nightmare she'd escaped. "I was the CFO of Laxentech," she began one evening, curled on the couch as he whittled wood nearby. "We were about to finalize a merger worth billions. But I found discrepancies, money disappearing into phantom accounts. When I brought it up, I was told to let it go. I didn't. The next day, I was suspended for policy violations. A week later, I was framed for stealing." She paused, fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. "I ran, changed my name, but they found me. Someone left a burner phone with GPS tracking in my motel room. They knew where to find me, and they left me out there like trash." Beck didn't react with surprise. Instead, he walked to a cabinet and pulled out a folded newspaper, yellowed with time. He handed it to her. The headline read, "Coltrane Wilder, Tech Billionaire Walks Away from Empire." Ivy looked up stunned. "You're Coltrane Wilder?" she asked. He nodded once. "Was, until the wolves started circling. I had a choice, fight them and become one of them, or disappear, and you chose this. I chose peace." The fire crackled low as Beck shared the chapters he'd buried long ago. He spoke not as a tech mogul but as a man tired of surviving in a world of polished knives and silver smiles. "My company built AI tools for the defense sector. At first it was about innovation, helping, healing, but the deeper I went, the more I realized we weren't solving problems, we were monetizing fear. He stood, paced, fingers twitching like he still felt the weight of boardroom betrayals. They wanted me gone when I started asking questions. So I signed it all away, left everything but a small trust, bought this land, and stayed out of sight. Ivy listened, something stirring in her chest. They were different stories, but told in the same language: deceit, exile, isolation. But now, perhaps, they were finally in a chapter they could write together. "Do you regret leaving it all behind?" she asked. Beck looked out the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every day, and yet not for a second. At first it was easy to pretend the past wouldn't follow them into the desert. The days were long but peaceful. Beck taught Ivy how to ride a horse, how to read the land by the shadows of mesquite trees, and how to listen to the wind like it was a language. They shared meals, told stories, and for a while even laughter returned. Then came the first sign, a single boot print in the soft dirt near the chicken coop. Not Beck's, not Ivy's. Next came the sound of drones, small, fast, quiet, but unmistakable. Beck spotted one just before dusk, its blinking red light vanishing into the distance as he aimed a warning shot. Finally, the message appeared, burned into the side of Beck's barn with a blowtorch, 3 chilling words: "We found you." Beck's response was swift. He reinforced the perimeter with tripwires and motion-activated flares. He dug out an old satellite phone, just in case. Ivy watched him with growing unease. This man who had once seemed like a monk of the wilderness was now a soldier preparing for war. Then one night they came. 3 men dressed in black, armed and moving with military precision, slipped through the shadows. One headed for the cabin, one for the barn, and one for Ivy, who was resting on the porch under the stars. But Beck was already moving. He'd been watching the ridge, waiting for this. He tackled the first man before he could reach the stairs, disarming him with brutal efficiency. The second reached the barn but was met with the bite of a German shepherd Beck had raised in secret for protection. The third managed to corner Ivy against the porch post, but she fought back, slamming a lantern into his face just before Beck arrived. By morning, the intruders were zip-tied and locked in the root cellar. Beck hauled them to the nearest sheriff's office, 40 miles away, leaving Ivy with a radio and 3 loaded rifles. When he returned, she didn't say anything. She just walked to him, wrapped her arms around his waist and held him like she never wanted to let go. They were no longer just strangers surviving. They were each other's reasons to fight. The attack changed something fundamental in both of them. They couldn't live in hiding forever, but they could choose what to build next. "I want to stay," Ivy said one morning as they watched the sun rise over the hills. "Not just here, with you. I want to make something." Beck looked at her, the firelight from the early dawn dancing in her eyes. "You're not just surviving anymore," he said. "You're becoming," and so Red Haven was born. At first it was just an idea, a self-sustaining ranch where people like them could come to recover, find peace, and remember who they were. But Ivy, with her brilliance for systems and structure, turned that idea into blueprints. Beck brought the land, the hands, and the grit to make it real. They rebuilt the barn, turned the spare cabins into guest homes, and cultivated the land with local crops. Word began to spread, quietly at first. A veteran with PTSD showed up, then a runaway teen, then a widowed teacher who'd lost everything in a fire. Each person was given shelter, food, work, and more importantly, dignity. Ivy found herself again, not as a corporate CFO but as a steward of something raw and true. She ran logistics, organized donations, started a small website. Beck trained the guests in ranch work, taught them how to ride, fix engines, and live close to the earth. Together, they created a place that wasn't just for healing, it was for transformation. Peace returned, but the ghost didn't vanish, not completely. One autumn morning, Ivy received a letter from a federal investigator. Her former company, Laxentech, had been exposed. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her name had been cleared. The state wanted her testimony in court. She stared at the envelope for a long time. Justice, vindication, the thing she had once burned for. But now, she hesitated. "What would going back give you?" Beck asked, sitting beside her on the porch swing. "I don't know," she whispered. "Closure, maybe. But closure wasn't always clean. Sometimes it was a weight." The next day, Ivy rode out alone to the high cliffs west of the ranch. In the still morning air, she opened the envelope, read it once more, and then dug a small hole beneath a desert cedar tree. She buried the letter there, along with the last pieces of a life she no longer wanted to reclaim. When she returned to Red Haven, Beck didn't ask. He only handed her a cup of tea and kissed her forehead, and the wind, always listening, carried the rest of her silence away. They didn't rush love. It came slowly, like water carving canyons over time. Beck left wildflowers on Ivy's work desk in the greenhouse. Ivy started making 2 mugs of coffee instead of 1. They watched sunsets without speaking and shared long glances that didn't need translation. Their love grew in the quiet places, the ones too sacred for words. Then one evening, under a full desert moon, Beck set out a blanket beneath their favorite mesquite tree. On it he placed a simple wooden box carved by hand. "I found this when I was 15, he said. "It was my mother's, passed down through the women in our family." He opened the box to reveal a small ring, silver, worn smooth, engraved with a crescent moon and stars. "It doesn't sparkle," he said, "but neither does truth. Marry me, Ivy." She didn't cry, she just smiled, eyes full of certainty, and said yes, yes 1,000 times. Marriage didn't change their rhythm, it only deepened their commitment. Redhaven grew, not into a business, but a movement. Ivy began speaking at rural women's shelters, telling her story of resilience. Beck trained former inmates in trades, giving them dignity and work. They applied for nonprofit status. Donations followed. Volunteers came from across the country. They added cabins, built a schoolhouse, started a trauma-informed therapy center. One day, a young woman named Clara showed up. She had a black eye, no suitcase, and no idea where to go. Ivy held her hand and said, "You're not broken, you're beginning," Clara sobbed, not from pain but from the relief of being seen. Years passed. Ivy and Beck aged gracefully, lines on their faces but softness in their smiles. Children ran across Redhaven's fields, horses galloped through open pastures, the schoolhouse chimed its old brass bell every morning. Ivy's greenhouse was lush with herbs. Beck's workshop hummed with music and tools. They sat one evening in the same chairs on the same porch, now a little older, their fingers still entwined. "We were supposed to die out there," Ivy whispered, eyes closed. "But we didn't," Beck said, kissing her hand. "We lived. And look what we made." Above them the stars shimmered. And below, in a once-forgotten desert, light bloomed. Enjoyed this powerful story of survival, love, and second chances? Hit that subscribe button, like and share with someone who believes in healing. Let's keep telling stories that remind us it's never too late to begin again.